Okay, that hurt. Oh, God. Oh, never again. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Roleplay Thursday. Last time I talked a little bit about how I started in on role-playing, how I found a site when I was very young. I played on a forum. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that, mostly because it's relevant to what I'm doing right now in D&D. Okay, so way back when, on this forum, at the time, excuse me, where did that come from? I haven't eaten yet today. Mm. So, so way back when I first joined this site, there was some kind of event going on. Basically, when people role played, they would uh, just put the blurb, and then whoever wanted to join, however they wanted to post, that would be how it would be. Like, if something started out being modern and then a vampire joins, well, now it's modern fantasy. Or maybe a portal opens up and a wizard shows up. People were very flexible, is what I'm trying to get at. But at the same time, there seemed to be a sort of an overarching story going on, because it was like the same 50 or 60 people who were on this forum doing a whole bunch of different stories together. So there was some sort of overarching story that was being formed over the course of months, just from these small things that are going on. When I joined, apparently something else had just ended, and the what people were calling the Vampire Wars was going on right now. Not only vampires were in the Vampire Wars, but it was predominantly these vampire lords that were warring against each other. One of the vampire lords was this role player named Corbin. He, he wasn't like an administrator or anything, but everyone sort of respected him and looked up to him whenever he was in a role play. People always seemed to defer to his judgment on something. It actually came to a point where one of the characters I created, because I'd given up on Skellington and I was sort of trying new things at this point. One of the characters I had created was this creature made up of a mysterious substance that regenerates quickly, but can only be destroyed by this certain mineral, of which he carried a dagger on him at all times, in case he were to encounter one of his own kind, because I guess they were hostile creatures. And I got into a roleplay fight with someone, and someone was like, I'm calling hacks here. This is clearly god modding, which is when you're playing a character being way overpowered, completely indestructible, basically a god character, which is generally frowned upon. And Corbin actually came in and he goes, okay, hold on. He can't be god modding unless he's one worse at writing, being more powerful than you, because someone can be more powerful than you, but if he writes it really badly, then he's just being a douchebag. But I was writing fairly well at that point, so I called him out on that. It's like, okay, well then the other thing is, if you have no weakness whatsoever and you are actually immortal. And I say, well, no, I'm not immortal. I have a weakness, but if I say what the weakness is in public, everyone will know it. It's a secret. And he's like, well, unfortunately, you're just gonna have to live with that. And I'm like, all right, fine. It's my dagger. And he's like, oh, okay. So that was the thing that happened to me. But these vampire wars went on for a good long time. I think around 6 months, where these vampires would build and create these elaborate mazes and fortresses that were manned by other people. And more people would have to come in and invade it, attack people, because vampires have all these specific ways of dying, and all of these people had different characters that were of different races, some of which were made up. They all had very specific ways of dying, similar to my character, and While I never got really involved, I did sort of monitor it. My character was sort of a watcher. He would appear, he would see something going on, he would give his 2 bits, he would like play a prank on somebody, and then he would leave. Sometimes he would help out, but not always. He really didn't have a side in this vampire war. But I did read and watch this, and it was very fun to read. But it only lasted like 6 months, so it did eventually end. And once it was over, nobody really knew what to do after that. And that was when I created my first main character, which is my character Kadash. I think I must have been. It must have been when I was 10. Like, I had to have been on there for more than a year, and it was 6 months of the Vampire War, so yeah, I was probably 10 when I created Kadash, which I now use for just about everything. Like, this character not only was so successful that I kept him and made him my main character, he stuck around for so long that he's still relevant in my life, in role playing and in D&D today. So that's 14 going on, I think about 14 years that I've had this character now. And as you can imagine, a lot has happened to him in 14 years of me living, which is actually several thousand years for him, because he's not immortal, but he doesn't die because he's connected to this overwhelming power source. But we'll get to all of him later. But right now, there were more characters on that forum I want to talk about. So Corbin was one of them. He was a major contender. He was well respected. Everyone seemed to look up to him. There was also the Mia Vampirus, who, well, not as much as Corbin, she was generally liked. There were a few people who would go after her, but generally, no one seemed to mind her. She didn't really have a fortress or anything. She only had like a mansion in the middle of the woods where she and her friends would basically stay. And me and her would have a lot of role plays, because she was like me. She was not a contender in the Vampire Wars, though she was a vampire. She was more of a watcher like I was, and so we would have our own little adventures. There was a few others. There was Frustro, there was Furion, there's so many characters from back then that are still relevant in my role playing today. And even though technically there were other people and there were other people's characters, over time I basically put my own touches into them, so much so that now they're sort of, even though they were rooted from other people, they're more my characters now than they are them. I mean, I haven't checked in on the site for a long time, but last time I checked in, they were actually still at it. So, I mean, God, that I think that was like 3 years ago, which means that they were still at it for at least 10 years, of which I was not part of. So after 10 years of role-playing, there has to be a disconnect of what my characters, or what my changes to their characters are to what their changes to the characters are. So they're more my characters now, they just have the same name. But, so I had the Ispin Kingdom was created there, Kadash was created there, Zoran Zorander, my master wizard, was created there. The Midnight Waltz, which is basically an evil version of the master wizard, who ended up getting his own lore and his own story, which I find particularly fun. He was created there. One of my friends from high school, he joined in, and he created a few characters. He doesn't do much role-playing. I don't think he does any role-playing anymore. That was a cloud. He doesn't do any role-playing anymore, but he hosts his own D&D now, and he's completely abandoned the characters that he created back then, so I basically took them, and I keep them as well. I mean, I got his permission to do that. I got his permission to do that one, so thumbs up for that one. But yeah, no, so that was a big part of my life, and it's still relevant to me today. And probably the last thing I want to talk about is one of my friends from that forum actually introduced me to another site where it was more chat based with a. I think it was like, it wasn't Chatango, but it was something similar to Chatango, where it would basically had like a chat bar that you typed into, and you had a maximum limit of, I think, like 500 or 5,000 characters. Somewhere between there, depending on how the site was feeling, because sometimes something would change. I've got to sneeze really bad right now. Nope. So anyway, he introduced me to this other site, but it was Dragon Ball Z themed. Now, of course, being a male kid growing up, I watched Cartoon Network and Toonami, and Dragon Ball Z was there, and of course I was a massive fan of Dragon Ball Z. My older sisters were really into anime. My older cousin, Michael, was really into anime, so of course I was introduced to anime really, really early, and I was super into Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z, and this was a site specifically for Dragon Ball Z where you created your own characters, learned your own techniques. There were a list of other techniques as well from the show that you could learn and use. There were power levels, there was a fighting system. It was actually very well crafted, very intricate, and I joined that as well. That the owner of that site, basically, he would do like the site exists for 6 months, and then it doesn't exist for 6 months, and then it does exist for another 6 months, and then it doesn't exist. And he would flop back and forth, and sometimes he would wipe the characters, and other times he wouldn't. And we got to keep our characters. I kept on going to that site, and I kept on trying to get some of my friends to go to that site, and they would sometimes, and they wouldn't stay for very long. I guess it was just something that I enjoyed that they weren't into, but that's fine. But that site, I think, finally went down like 3 or 4 years ago, and it hasn't come back up since. So I hope that guy's okay. I haven't heard anything from him in a long time. Oh well. So that was some more adventures into role-playing. Next time, I'm probably going to get into why what I just talked about is relevant to what's going on now. So I'll probably be doing the transition from in the past to a much more recent past to more relevant past. So, bye everybody, I'll see you tomorrow.